There is a number in the oldest book on earth that no one has ever been able to explain away. 969. It is the length of a single human life, written down plainly as a fact in the same list that gives us the first names of the human race. One man walked the earth for 969 years, longer than any person before him, and longer than anyone who has lived since. And the strangest part is not how long he lived. It is when he died. Because if you take the numbers exactly as they are written, and you add them the way a child would, the year this man breathed his last is the same year the sky broke open and the flood swallowed the world. The longest life ever lived ended in the very season that ended everything. And that is not the only warning hidden in him. Some say the warning was in his name from the day he was born, spoken over a cradle by a father who walked with God and then vanished off the face of the earth. So, what was he, this man who outlived 10 generations and died on the edge of the end? A curse, stretched to its limit? Or the longest single act of mercy in the whole of the ancient record? This is the story of Methuselah, the man who lived 969 years. Begin with the world he was born into, because it explains everything that comes after. It was old already. By the time Methuselah drew his first breath, the human race had been on the earth for centuries, and it had not spent those centuries growing wiser. It had spent them growing stronger and crueler and more certain that it needed no one above it. Understand how these people aged, because it is the key to the whole account. They did not get their 80 years and hand the world to strangers. A man lived the better part of 1,000 years. He watched his own sons grow old. He saw his mistakes ripen into the mistakes of nations. Nothing was forgotten, because the people who had done it were still alive to keep doing it. So evil did not fade between the generations. It compounded without a break for centuries in the hands of men who had all the time in the world to perfect it. The line of the first murderer had built the first cities, walls and gates and towers of cut stone, and inside those walls the crafts multiplied. Bronze and iron worked into blades, music and herding and trade, a world that looked from a distance like progress. And there was a song in that world that tells you exactly what kind of progress it was. A man named Lamech, in the line of Cain, took 2 wives and stood before them and sang. "I have killed a man for wounding me," he boasted, "a young man for striking me." It is the first song in the Bible, and it is a song about murder, sung with pride, set to music, and taught to the women at home. That was the spirit of the age, not shame at the killing, pride in it. But human hands were not the only teachers in that world. Something had come down into it from above. In the days of Methuselah's own grandfather, the old writings say, beings they call the Watchers descended, 200 of them, and they taught mankind what heaven had never meant for the ground, the forging of metal into weapons, the cutting of roots and the mixing of drugs, the reading of the stars for omens, and the signs of the sun and the moon. They taught the painting of the eye and the making of the face beautiful, so that men would kill each other to possess it. Knowledge was not the sin. Stolen knowledge, poured into hands that only wanted power, was the sin. And from that mixture came the mighty men, the men of renown. Some of them, the record hints, taller and stronger than any natural man had a right to be. All of them hungry for the same thing above every other: to carve a name into stone that would outlast them, to build a thing so large that the future would have no choice but to say, "Someone great once stood here." That was the air Methuselah breathed as a boy, a world of monuments and violence, filling up with people who lived nearly 1,000 years and used every one of them to take whatever they wanted. And the earth was filling fast. Men who lived that long did not leave small families behind them. The plains were crowded, and the crowd was ancient and clever and armed, and almost none of it was ever looking up. It was a civilization at the height of its power, and it was rotting from the inside out, and it could not feel itself rot. The old record has a terrible way of summing it up. The earth was filled with violence, it says, and every intention of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil, continually. Not most hearts, not most of the time, every intention, only evil, continually. There is no gap in that sentence for a single good day. Into that world, one family was still standing apart, one thread that had not been swallowed, and at the head of it, in Methuselah's own house, stood the strangest man of the entire age. His father. His father's name was Enoch, and the record says something about him that it says of almost no one else in the whole span of the Bible. It does not say Enoch was strong. It does not say he was a king or a builder or a man of renown. It says simply that he walked with God. 3 words, and they are set down twice, as if the writer wanted to be certain you did not read past them. Enoch walked with God. In a world where every intention of every heart was only evil, one man kept his eyes fixed upward and walked, step after step, in a friendship with heaven that no one around him could understand. He was not hiding in a cave. He lived in that violent world, fathered children in it, grew old in it. He simply refused to belong to it. And the God he walked beside began to show him things. Enoch was given a vision of what was coming. Not a vague unease, a clear and terrible sight of a judgment already decided. He saw the Lord come with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all the ungodly, and he saw the waters, a flood that would rise and cover the violent world and wash every trace of it away. He saw the end before there was a single cloud in the sky to warn of it. And then, with that vision burning in him, his wife bore him a son. Now, put yourself in his place. You have seen the end of the world. You know, with the certainty of a thing already spoken, that it is coming, and you are handed a newborn boy. What do you name a child born under a sky you already know is going to fall? Enoch made a choice that the ancient teachers never stopped talking about. He took the warning he had been given, and he buried it inside his son's name, so that the child himself would become a walking prophecy. Methuselah. The old readings break the name into pieces, and the pieces are frightening. One part carries the sense of a man or of death. The other part means to send, or a dart thrown down from above. Put them together, and generation after generation of teachers heard the same sentence hidden in the sounds. When he is dead, it shall be sent. When he is dead, it shall be sent. The flood held back, waiting on the life of a single boy, as though God had told the father, "This child is my hourglass. While he breathes, the world still has time. On the day he dies, the water comes." Whether or not the name was ever meant to carry that precise meaning, this much the numbers make undeniable. The boy Enoch named would live longer than any human being in all of history, and he would die in the very year the flood arrived. The name and the arithmetic point at the same thing: a countdown wearing the face of a child. But here is where the story turns, and turns hard. Enoch, the father who walked with God, did not grow old and die like other men. The record tells it in a way that has unsettled readers for thousands of years. Enoch walked with God, it says, and he was not, for God took him. He did not die. He was taken. One day he was on the earth, walking as he always had, and the next he was simply gone, carried out of the world by the God he had walked beside. He was 365 years old, a young man by the measure of that age, and he left no grave, no body, no ending anyone could point to. And think hard about who he left behind. Methuselah was 300 years old the day his father vanished, old enough to be a patriarch himself by then, with sons and grandsons of his own. And in a single moment, the one man on earth who walked with God was gone, lifted away, and the son was left standing in an emptying world, holding a name that meant the end was coming. He did not get to keep his father. He got to keep the warning. Imagine carrying that for century after century. Every time a stranger in the market asked your name, you answered with a sentence about the end of the world. Every child you fathered, every harvest you counted, was one more grain of sand fallen through the glass. The taller the monuments grew around you, the louder the boasting of the mighty men, the more certain you became of the one thing that none of them believed. It is coming, and somehow, for reasons I did not choose, it is waiting on me. The old writings say that Enoch, before he was taken, passed everything he knew to this son, the vision, the warning, the charge to hold the line of the ones who still walked with God, no matter how thin that line wore. Methuselah became the keeper of it. The bridge. And a bridge is only worth anything if it reaches the far side, so Methuselah did the one thing the whole plan required of him. He lived, and he lived, and he lived. This is the part the number is really telling you. 969 years is not a fairy tale detail dropped into an old list. It is a task. Methuselah's work, whether he ever spoke it aloud or not, was to carry the warning of his vanished father across the widest gap in human history, and to hand it, alive and intact, to whoever would one day build the answer to it. And the gap was enormous. It would swallow lifetimes. So he outlived them. That is the quiet horror and wonder of a life that long. He outlived his friends, and then the sons of his friends, and then everyone who had ever known his father's face. He watched cities he remembered being founded grow into proud capitals, and he watched the men who founded them grow monstrous with power. He buried people he loved and kept walking. He became a rumor, then a legend, then a fixture, the ancient man who had simply always been there, older than anyone's memory of the world. And in all those centuries, the record never once shows him fighting. He is not a hero who conquers, or a king who rules, or a builder who leaves a wall behind. He is a man who endures and keeps his father's faith alive in a house that grew quieter with every 100 years, while the world outside grew louder and richer and worse. At the age of 187, Methuselah fathered a son, and he named him Lamech. Not the killer from the line of Cain who sang about murder to his wives. A different Lamech. Born in the line that still walked with God, a boy who would grow up under the long shadow of his grandfather's terrible name. And when this Lamech himself was 182 years old, he fathered a son of his own, and over that cradle he spoke a prophecy, gentler than the one spoken over his own grandfather, but pointing in the same direction. This one, Lamech said, shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. He named that baby Noah. Stop and see what has just happened, because it is easy to read straight past it. Methuselah, the son of Enoch who saw the flood, was now the grandfather of Noah, the one man who would survive it. The warning had reached the builder. The bridge had touched the far shore, and Methuselah was still alive to watch it happen. He had known his father Enoch, the man who walked with God and was taken up alive, and he would live to know his own great-grandson, the man who would walk with God straight through the water. One life stretched impossibly long, holding both ends of the story at once. There has never been another human being placed the way this one was. He was the living memory of the world. He could tell Noah, from his own lips, exactly what his own father had seen with his own eyes. Not a legend passed hand to hand and worn smooth by 100 retellings, a first-hand account carried by a single unbroken witness, all the way from the man who prophesied the flood to the man who would build the boat that outlasted it. That is what 969 years was for. Before the water rises, one thing. If this is the kind of story you were never told in church, subscribe. There is a new biblical film on this channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now, back to the oldest man in the world, standing between a father who was taken and a grandson who was warned, watching the clock of his own life run down. Because that is what those last years were, a clock running down in full view of a world that refused to look at it. Somewhere in Methuselah's final stretch, God spoke the sentence that set the outer edge of the end. "My spirit shall not always strive with man," he said, "for he also is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. 120 years, a deadline laid quietly over a world that had no idea the counting had begun. And inside that window, Methuselah's own grandson Noah began to do the impossible thing. He began to build. An ark, a wooden ship the size of a mountain, marked out on dry ground, far from any sea, to survive a kind of water the world had never yet seen fall from the sky. And the old man was still there, still breathing. Still, in some quiet arithmetic that no one else could see, the reason the water had not yet come. Picture the scene the way it must have looked. The most ancient man alive, skin like cracked leather, a beard gone the color of ash, eyes clouded with centuries. So old that men who were themselves hundreds of years old had never once known a world without him in it. And he watches his grandson raise the ribs of a great ship into an empty sky, board by board, year after year, while an entire civilization walks past on the road and laughs. To that world, the old man and the boat were the same joke told two ways. A ship going nowhere on dry land, and beside it, a patriarch so ancient he had become part of the scenery, the two of them muttering about a flood that no one had ever seen fall. The city measured everything by what you built and what your name was worth, and by that measure, the pair of them were worth nothing at all. Every day the ark grew a little larger. Every day the old man drew a little closer to the edge of his life, and the two clocks, the ship rising and the breath running out, were counting down toward the very same hour. He had spent his whole enormous life as a single-held breath. Now the breath was almost gone. And still, for as long as his heart kept beating, the door of mercy stood open. That is the shape the record lays out, if you follow it closely. As long as the oldest man in the world drew breath, the flood did not fall. His life was the last restraint, the final measure of the patience of God, stretched longer than it had ever been stretched for anyone. 969 years of it! Nearly 1,000 years of a doomed world being handed just a little more time, and spending almost every day of it building monuments, taking what it wanted, and refusing to look up at the ship on the plain or the ancient man beside it. And then the old man died. The record does not give him a dramatic death. It gives him the same plain sentence it gives everyone else in that ancient list. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. That is all. He died. No last words written down. No deathbed vision. Just the quiet closing of the longest life the world had ever held or would ever hold again. But do the arithmetic the way the ancient readers did, and the quiet sentence turns into thunder. Methuselah fathered Lamech at 187, Lamech fathered Noah at 182, and the flood came in the 600th year of Noah's life. Add the three numbers together, 187 and 182 and 600. 969, the exact length of Methuselah's life, to the year. The man died, and the world ended in the same season. The hourglass hidden in his name ran out its final grain, and in the very moment it did, the thing his father had seen 4 centuries before came down out of the sky and up out of the deep. When he is dead, it shall be sent. And it was sent. But that was not the end of it. Because the story this number tells is not really a story about death. It is a story about a door and about how long God was willing to hold it open. Look again at what those 969 years actually did. They were not a reward handed to a good man for being good. Methuselah does not get a single line of praise in the entire record. He is not called righteous, the way his father and his grandson are. He is not called a preacher or a prophet. He is given one thing, and one thing only: time. More of it than any human being has ever been given. And that time was not for him. It was for everyone else. Every year the old man lived was another year the door stood open. Another year the ark was not yet finished, and the sky was not yet torn. Another year that any man in any city could have walked out to the plain, looked at the strange ship and the impossibly old patriarch beside it, and turned around and lived. No one did. That is the weight the number quietly carries. It was never that they had not been warned. They had the warning standing in plain sight for longer than any nation in history has ever lasted, in the shape of a boat and the shape of an old man, and they simply chose, year after year after year, to look the other way. The longest life in the Bible was not a monument to one man's endurance. It was the patience of God made visible, counted out in a single human heartbeat that simply would not stop. 969 years of held judgment. Nearly 1,000 years of one more chance, and one more, and one more. And notice the mercy hidden in the very timing of his death. The old writings make a point of it, and it is tender in a way most people miss entirely. Methuselah died before the flood, not in it. His long life ended quietly in the last year, so that the man who walked with God would not have to watch the water take his own grandfather along with the mockers. The keeper of the warning was carried gently off the board just before the storm he had waited for his whole life finally broke. He held the door until the last possible moment, and then he was allowed to lay the burden down and go. So what do you do with a number like 969? You can treat it as a riddle, an oddity in an old book, and argue for centuries about whether a man could really live that long. People have done exactly that, and they have missed the whole point while they counted. Or you can hear it the way the ancient readers heard it, as the sound of a clock, as the measure of how far a patient God will go, and how long he will wait, and how much time he will pour out on a world that has stopped listening, all of it balanced on the life of one quiet man. A man who never built a monument, who never carved his name, who outlasted every king and giant and mighty man of his age simply by refusing to die until the very last grain had fallen. The men of renown carved their names into stone to be remembered forever, and not one of those names survived the water. Methuselah carved nothing, and his name and his number are still spoken thousands of years later in every language on earth, wherever anyone opens the book and stops, the way you stopped tonight at that impossible run of years. He was the longest mercy God ever showed, and when the mercy was finally spent, the door closed, and the world he had held open for nearly 1,000 years was gone in the space of a single year. But the story of God's patience did not end when the floodwater dried. It only changed its shape. After the flood, God no longer measured his mercy in the length of one old man's life. He came down and made a home among his people, in a thing of gold and wood that carried his very presence through the desert, a thing so holy that to reach out and touch it wrongly was to fall dead on the spot. A box that toppled the idols of empires, that brought down the walls of a city without a battle. That struck dead the man who reached out to steady it and blessed the humble house that sheltered it, the most powerful and most feared object in the entire ancient world. And then, one day, it simply vanished from history, and to this hour, no one can tell you where it went. That is the next film on this channel, and it is waiting for you now. The Ark of the Covenant, the object everyone feared. If you want to know what was truly sealed inside it, why it killed the men who touched it, and where on earth it finally disappeared to, subscribe, and I will see you there.